A deserter. That's what you are. A ghost who ran from a firefight and left your unit to die. The crowd of soldiers gathered at the gate of Forward Operating Base Nightingale went silent, the nervous energy of the initial alarm curdling into a tense, voyeuristic curiosity. They watched as Captain Thorne, his uniform immaculate despite the oppressive Afghan heat, stood with his hands on his hips, his voice a blade of pure, unadulterated contempt. The woman before him didn't react. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even meet his gaze. Her focus was entirely on the three broken men she had just lowered to the dust-caked ground, her movements economical and precise. But when the base commander, General Matheson, arrived on the scene and saw the specific, methodical way she checked the tourniquet on the first seal, his breath caught in his throat. He saw more than a survivor. He saw a signature. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice, but in the weight of one's actions, type competence below. The figure had materialized out of the heat shimmer an hour earlier, a phantom walking out of the hostile expanse of the Karingal Valley, a place infamously known as the Valley of Death. At first, the watchtower had mistaken her for a mirage, a trick of the exhausted eye. But the mirage kept coming, slow, steady, and impossibly burdened. When she was close enough for the binoculars to resolve her image, a wave of confusion and disbelief washed over the command post. It was a lone soldier, small in frame, wearing a tattered, unrecognizable uniform that seemed to have been pieced together from scraps. She was carrying three fully grown men in combat gear, a feat that defied physics and human endurance. Two were slung over her shoulders in a fireman's carry that had been modified for two bodies, a macabre parody of a yoke, while the third was strapped to her back with a harness of scavenged webbing. The dust clung to her like a second skin, her face a mask of dried blood, sweat, and grime, her eyes lost in the deep shadows of exhaustion. She moved with a rhythmic, almost mechanical gait, a testament to a will that had long since overridden the protests of her body. When she finally reached the gate, she didn't collapse. She simply stopped, and with a control that was utterly unnerving, began the process of carefully, gently, placing her burdens on the ground. The medics had been scrambled, the security teams had formed a perimeter, and Captain Thorne, the officer of the day, had arrived to take control of what he immediately assessed to be a catastrophic failure of discipline. He saw a rogue element, a survivor who had broken under pressure. He saw weakness. He saw a story that needed to be contained. Captain Thorne's voice echoed across the hard-packed earth of the motor pool, each word a hammer blow meant to break her. I asked you a question, soldier. What is your name and rank? Who is your commanding officer? Where is the rest of your unit? He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as she worked, oblivious to his authority. She was checking the pulse of the second man, her fingers pressing against his neck with a practiced calm. Thorne saw her tattered gear, the non-regulation rifle slung across her back, an old, heavily modified M14 EBR that looked more like a relic than a service weapon, and his certainty hardened into righteous anger. This was a breakdown, a catastrophic failure of protocol. This was what happened when standards were allowed to slip. Look at me when I'm speaking to you, he commanded, his voice rising in volume. You walk out of the desert carrying three of our best operators, looking like you crawled out of a grave, and you expect to be met with a parade? I see a deserter. I see a coward who cut and ran while these men fought. You have 5 seconds to identify yourself before I have you thrown in the brig for dereliction of duty in a combat zone. The silence that followed was profound. The only sounds were the distant hum of the base generator and the shuffling feet of the assembled soldiers, none of whom dared to intervene. The woman finished her assessment of the third SEAL, making a minute adjustment to the pressure bandage on his leg. Only then, when she was satisfied that her charges were stable and in the care of the approaching medics, did she finally push herself to her feet. She was shorter than Thorne had realized, her frame wiry and compact. She slowly raised her head, and for the first time, he saw her eyes. They were not filled with fear or defiance or exhaustion. They were the color of slate, calm and impossibly deep, and they held an emptiness that chilled him to the bone. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, a silent, damning indictment of his assumptions. Her stillness was more powerful than any shout, her silence a louder refutation than any argument. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane, a terrifying quiet that promised a storm of unbelievable magnitude was not coming, but had already passed, and she was all that was left in its wake. The medics swarmed the wounded SEALs, their voices a controlled chaos of medical terminology and urgent commands. Massive trauma to the lower extremities on this one. He's lost a lot of blood. We need ONEG now. Pupils are sluggish, possible TBI. Amid the flurry of activity, the woman stood apart, a statue carved from dust and resolve. She watched them work, her gaze clinical, analytical, as if cross-referencing their actions against an internal checklist. Captain Thorne, feeling his authority slipping away in the face of her unnerving composure, felt a surge of renewed frustration. He was losing control of the narrative he had so confidently constructed. "I'm not done with you," he seethed, stepping directly into her path. "You are under my authority until this situation is clarified. You will hand over your weapon and submit to a full debriefing." He reached for the rifle slung over her back, the strange, archaic weapon that so offended his sense of uniformity. The moment his fingers touched the worn metal, her hand shot out, not with aggression, but with an impossible speed and precision. She didn't grab his wrist. She simply laid her fingers over his, her touch light but firm. "No, sir," she said. Her voice was low and raspy from dehydration, but it carried an authority that had nothing to do with rank. It was the voice of pure, unadulterated competence. Thorne froze, shocked more by the quiet finality in her tone than the physical contact. In that moment, something shifted in the crowd. The whispers started. The other soldiers, the seasoned NCOs and the battle-hardened grunts, saw the interaction not as insubordination, but as something else. They saw the way she held herself, the economy of her motion, the way her eyes never stopped scanning, even when focused on him. They saw the subtle cues that Thorne, in his arrogant certainty, had missed completely. They saw a professional, a quiet professional. One of the medics, a seasoned sergeant first class, looked up from his patient. "Captain, this man's femur is shattered, but he's in a perfectly applied traction splint made from a rifle cleaning rod and comms wire. And this tourniquet, it was applied within 30 seconds of the wound. Whoever did this saved his leg. Hell, they saved his life." The medic's words hung in the air, a direct contradiction to Thorne's accusation of desertion. The impossible feat wasn't just that she had carried 3 men for what must have been miles, but that she had done so after performing advanced field medicine under what could only have been horrific circumstances. The shock began to ripple through the onlookers. Thorne's face tightened, his mind struggling to reconcile the medic's expert testimony with the image of the disheveled, insubordinate woman before him. He opened his mouth to argue, to reassert his narrative, but he was interrupted by the arrival of a cloud of dust that announced the approach of a command vehicle. The Humvee screeched to a halt, and out stepped General Matheson, the 2-star commander of all regional forces. He was a man whose presence commanded immediate respect, his face a roadmap of decades of service. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the wounded SEALs, the stunned medics, the confused Captain Thorne, and finally, the lone, silent woman. He walked past Thorne as if he weren't there, his gaze locked on her. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his eyes tracing the lines of exhaustion on her face, the set of her jaw, the way she stood, perfectly balanced, even now. He saw the old M14, and a flicker of recognition, of something profound and unsettling, crossed his face. "Report," Matheson said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the tension. It was not a question. It was a command from one professional to another. The woman finally broke her silence for a second time. Her voice, though still raspy, was clear and devoid of any emotion. At 0400 hours, callsign Predator 4 was ambushed in Grid Square 7B. Coordinated attack. RPGs initiated, followed by complex machine gun fire from 3 elevated positions. Comms jammed immediately. Team leader, Lieutenant Miller, Kia, in the initial volley. 2 other team members incapacitated. I suppressed the enemy positions, stabilized the casualties, and proceeded to the nearest friendly position. Total distance covered, 32 kilometers. Time elapsed, 14 hours, her report was a masterpiece of military brevity. It was a sterile, factual account of a nightmare, delivered with the emotional detachment of a machine. She offered no excuses, no embellishments, no hint of the superhuman effort it had taken. The information she provided was tactical, precise, and utterly damning to Thorne's assumptions. She had not run from the fight. She had been the only thing standing between the enemy and the complete annihilation of a SEAL team. The silence that followed her report was different. It was no longer tense or curious. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated awe. The full weight of her words began to settle upon the crowd. 32 kilometers. 14 hours. Carrying over 600 pounds of men and gear through the most hostile territory on the planet. After winning a firefight alone, it wasn't just an act of bravery. It was an act that bordered on the mythological. Captain Thorne stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. That's impossible, he stammered, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. No single soldier could do that. Who are you? General Matheson turned his head slowly, and for the first time, he fixed Thorne with a glare so cold it could have frozen the desert sun. Captain, the general said, his voice dangerously quiet. You are relieved of your post as officer of the day. You will report to my aide, and you will not speak another word until you are told to do so. Is that understood? Thorne's face went white. He snapped a salute, his body moving on pure instinct. Yes, General. He turned and walked away, his back ramrod straight. But every soldier on that tarmac could feel the radiating heat of his public and complete humiliation. The general turned back to the woman. His entire demeanor softened, the hard lines of his face easing into an expression of profound respect, tinged with something that looked like sorrow. It's good to see you, Master Sergeant, he said, his voice now gentle. Though I wish it weren't under these circumstances. We had you listed as unaccounted for. The title Master Sergeant landed with the force of a physical blow among the assembled troops. She was a senior non-commissioned officer, a rank that commanded immense respect. The way she looked, the way she had been treated, it all clicked into a horrifying picture of a massive, collective failure of judgment, spearheaded by Captain Thorne. The woman simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of her head. There was no time to update my status, sir. My priority was them. She gestured with her chin toward the SEALs, who were now being loaded onto stretchers. One of them, still conscious, reached out a hand toward her. Kashii, he whispered, the name of prayer. It was Kashii. At the utterance of that name, a new wave of whispers, this time hushed and reverent, swept through the NCOs and older soldiers. It was a call sign from a ghost story, a legend whispered about in hushed tones in smoke pits and remote outposts. Kashii the Deathless, a phantom operator from a unit so secret that its existence was officially denied. General Matheson's aide, a young, efficient major, hurried forward with a tablet. Sir, I have her file. The general took the device, his eyes never leaving the master sergeant's face. Read it to me, Major. Read it out loud. I think everyone here needs to understand what they are looking at. The major, sensing the gravity of the moment, cleared his throat and began to read from the screen. His voice was steady, but it carried a note of disbelief, as if he couldn't quite believe the words he was speaking. Rostova, Eva, Master Sergeant. Unit designation, classified under Statute 9 Delta. Service record, redacted. Primary specialization, Special Operations Combat Medic, Long-Range Reconnaissance, Unconventional Warfare. He paused, swallowing hard. Call sign, Kashii. Awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in the Panjshir Valley. Awarded the Silver Star, twice, for valor in. The location is redacted, sir. Awarded the Bronze Star with V device 4 times. Purple Heart, 6 times. The list went on. It was a litany of heroism, a career forged in the crucible of the nation's most secret and dangerous wars. Each medal, each citation, was a testament to a level of courage and competence that was almost beyond comprehension. The soldiers stood in stunned silence, their assumptions turning to ash in their mouths. They weren't looking at a deserter. They were looking at a living legend. They were in the presence of greatness, and they had stood by silently while a fool had berated her. The major continued, his voice trembling slightly now. Notes from previous commanding officers include, Master Sergeant Rostova is the single most effective soldier I have ever served with. Her tactical acumen is matched only by her medical skill. She operates on a level that is, frankly, peerless. Another entry. She is a ghost. You don't send her to win a fight. You send her when the fight is already lost, and you need a miracle. When the major finished, a deafening silence fell over the assembly. General Matheson slowly, deliberately, raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was a mark of the deepest, most profound respect one warrior could show another. Master Sergeant Rostova, he said, his voice thick with emotion. On behalf of a grateful nation and a humbled command, welcome back. We thought you were dead. Eva Rostova looked at the general, then at the sea of faces staring at her with awe and shame. She held their gaze for a moment, her slate-gray eyes seeing everything. Then, with the same precision and economy of motion she had displayed since her arrival, she returned the general's salute. Just doing my job, sir, she said. And in those 4 simple words, she encapsulated the entire ethos of the quiet professional. Her work spoke for itself. It needed no defense, no explanation, and no applause. The story of what happened at the gates of FOB Nightingale spread not like wildfire, but like the shockwave from a detonation. It moved through the barracks, the chow halls, and the command centers with astonishing speed. It was transmitted over encrypted channels to other bases, whispered from pilots to crew chiefs, from intelligence analysts to mechanics. The legend of Kashiai, which had always been a ghost story, was now a tangible reality. It had a face, a name, and a feat of arms that defied belief. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova became an instant myth. The path she had walked out of the valley was unofficially christened Rostova's Mile, a piece of ground now regarded with a kind of superstitious reverence. Grunts on patrol would point to the distant heat shimmer and say, "That's where she came from." The details of her story grew with each telling. The SEALs, once they were stable, filled in the horrific gaps. They spoke of an ambush so perfectly executed that they never stood a chance. They described watching their lieutenant fall, of being torn apart by machine gun fire, of the absolute certainty of their own deaths. And then, they spoke of the ghost. They described how Rostova, who had been their attached medic, had moved through the kill zone with a terrifying calm, laying down a volume of fire from her ancient M14 that made the enemy think they were facing a platoon, not a single soldier. They told of how she had low-crawled under a hail of bullets to drag each of them to cover, how she had performed life-saving procedures, a needle decompression on one, a cricothyrotomy on another, while simultaneously returning fire. They spoke of her silence, of her focus, of a competence so absolute it was almost divine. She hadn't just saved them, she had willed them to live. The narrative of her quiet, relentless professionalism became the new standard against which all other acts of bravery were measured. Her silence at the gate in the face of Thorne's accusations was now seen not as weakness, but as the ultimate expression of strength, the strength of someone whose record was so undeniable that it required no defense. Captain Thorne, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale. He was not formally punished, but his public shaming at the hands of General Matheson was a far worse fate. He was ostracized, the subject of scornful whispers and pitying glances. His authority was shattered. He had committed the ultimate sin of leadership. He had allowed his ego and his assumptions to blind him to the truth. For days, he confined himself to his quarters, replaying the event in his mind, the memory of Rostova's calm, empty eyes haunting him. He had built his career on the rigid application of rules and regulations, on the belief that the appearance of discipline was discipline itself. She had shown him how hollow that belief was. True discipline was not an oppressed uniform or a loud voice. It was in the calm, methodical execution of one's duty under unimaginable pressure. It was a lesson he had learned at the cost of his reputation. A week after the incident, he finally found the courage to seek her out. He found her on the firing range, alone, meticulously cleaning her M14 rifle. The weapon was disassembled before her on a mat, each piece cleaned with a surgeon's precision. She acknowledged his presence with a slight nod, but did not speak. He stood there for a full minute, his prepared speech dying on his lips. Finally, he managed to stammer out the words. "Master Sergeant." I wanted to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. My assumptions were wrong. I failed to see what was right in front of me. I am truly sorry. Eva Rostova paused her work. She picked up the bolt carrier group, wiping it down with an oilcloth, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look at him. After a long moment of silence that stretched Thorne's nerves to the breaking point, she finally spoke, her voice as flat and unemotional as it had been at the gate. Your apology is irrelevant. Captain. Thorne flinched, expecting a tirade, addressing down. But it never came. She continued, what is relevant is what you do now. Assumptions kill people in this line of work. Yours could have. Learn from it. See the soldier, not the uniform. See the action, not the appearance. That is all that matters. She placed the bolt carrier back into the rifle's receiver with a soft, metallic click. The sound was one of finality. She had not offered him forgiveness or absolution. She had given him a professional standard to live up to. It was a far more valuable and far more challenging gift. Years passed. FOB Nightingale was eventually decommissioned, a relic of a long and difficult war. But the story of Rostova's Mile endured. It became a part of the institutional folklore of the Special Operations community, a lesson taught to new recruits at selection and to young officers at command school. It was a story about the dangers of assumption and the supreme virtue of quiet competence. The legend of Kashiai the Deathless grew, but Eva Rostova herself remained a ghost. There were rumors of her actions in other conflicts, other forgotten corners of the world, but she never sought the spotlight. She remained what she had always been, a quiet professional, defined not by the medals on her chest, which she never wore, but by the lives she saved and the impossible tasks she accomplished. Her legacy was not a statue or a plaque. It was a mindset, a philosophy that she had imprinted upon an entire generation of warriors. It was the understanding that respect is not demanded by rank, but earned through action. It was the knowledge that the most dangerous person on the battlefield is often the one you overlook. Captain Thorne, humbled and remade by his experience, went on to become a better officer. He never forgot the lesson Rostova had taught him. He became known for his quiet, observant leadership style, for his ability to see the potential in every soldier, regardless of their appearance or background. He would often tell the story of his own failure, using his shame as a powerful teaching tool. I once stood in the presence of a hero, he would tell the young lieutenants under his command, and I was too blind and too arrogant to see it. I judged her by the dirt on her uniform, not the steel in her spine. Do not make my mistake. Your assumptions are your greatest enemy. Look for the quiet ones. Look for the ones who let their actions do the talking. They are the ones who will carry you out of the fire. His story, and hers, became intertwined, a parable of arrogance and humility, of ignorance and wisdom. It was a reminder that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. It endures. It carries the weight when no one else can, and it walks out of the darkness, not for praise or for glory, but because it is the right thing to do. The ultimate lesson of Master Sergeant Eva Rostova was a profound and enduring one. It was a testament to the idea that a person's worth is not contained in their file, or in the insignia on their collar, or in the volume of their voice. It resides in the silent, often unseen, space between a challenge and a response. It is measured in steady hands when others tremble, in a calm heart when chaos reigns, in the relentless, forward motion against impossible odds. Her legacy was a powerful counter-narrative to a world that often celebrates the loudest voice in the room, the most confident pronouncement, the most polished appearance. She was proof that the most formidable forces are often the most unassuming, that true competence requires no external validation. It is its own proof, its own reward, its own undeniable truth. The story of her walk out of the Karengal Valley became more than just a war story. It became a symbol of resilience, a metaphor for the quiet strength that lies dormant in the human spirit, waiting for a moment of crisis to reveal itself. It taught that prejudice is a form of blindness, a self-imposed cataract that prevents us from seeing the greatness that stands right before us. Captain Thorne's initial judgment was a reflection of a common human failing, the rush to categorize, to label, to fit the world into neat, comfortable boxes. Rostova, in her silent, dusty defiance, shattered those boxes. She was a living embodiment of the fact that the most extraordinary people often wear the most ordinary camouflage. Her life was a mission, her identity forged in actions that would never be declassified, in sacrifices that would never be publicly acknowledged. She sought no fame, no recognition. Her purpose was singular: to be there when things were at their worst, to be the steady hand in the storm, to be the one who walks toward the fire. That day at the gates of FOB Nightingale, the soldiers who witnessed her arrival didn't just see a hero. They saw a fundamental truth of the universe revealed, that the quietest rivers often run the deepest, and that the most powerful storms are often preceded by an unnerving, profound calm. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a professional's actions define their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.